All right, so John Bolton, one of the former top national security advisors under the Donald Trump administration, who also worked with previous Republican administrations like Reagan and George W. Bush, recently did a sit-down interview with CNN's Jake Tapper, where he honestly, I won't even say saying the quiet part out loud, but basically just came out and openly admitted that he himself has personally orchestrated the overthrowing of sovereign governments around the world. So let's just go ahead and watch this first clip here.
I don't know that I agree with you. To be fair, with all due respect, one doesn't have to be brilliant to attempt a coup.
I disagree with that. As somebody who has helped plan coup d'etat, not here, but other places, it takes a lot of work, and that's not what he did. It was just stumbling around from one idea to another. Ultimately, he did unleash the rioters at the Capitol. As to that, there's no doubt.
I don't know that I agree with.
Okay, so that's the first clip here. We're going to get to a follow-up clip where Jake Tapper, I guess one of his producers, told him that, hey, maybe you should follow up on the fact that you have a former top national security advisor who just openly admitted to international crimes. But first, in this clip, Jake Tapper didn't even have a follow-up question to that. They basically just carried on with the conversation about the January 6 hearings and about Donald Trump's sloppily attempted coup, which, I mean, listen, we're going to get into the, previous coup attempts led by or participated in by this guy John Bolton, but even just on the points that he was making there, that Trump was some bumbling buffoon who couldn't possibly have orchestrated an overthrow of the government. Sure, I guess at one level he was definitely incompetent in his approach to trying to overthrow the government, but just because you're incompetent and stupid and sloppy in your methods doesn't mean that you weren't trying to do it. So that's not really an excuse. And even right now, it's not like Donald Trump has conceded defeat, okay? He's still out there on the campaign trail insisting that the 2020 election was stolen, that he should, even to this day, be implemented as the rightful president of the United States. So it's not only just like something that he attempted and then realized that he was wrong in doing. No, he's still trying to do this. And in fact, you have Republican state legislatures alongside the Supreme Court and lower level courts who are basically setting it up with the independent state legislature theory that I've covered in previous videos. They're basically setting up so that they can do exactly what Donald Trump tried to do in 2020, but do it much more seamlessly and legally in 2024. So the idea that this was a bumbled attempt at a coup, sure, at some extent, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't a threat or that Donald Trump shouldn't be held accountable for trying to go about that in the way that he did. But before we get into this second clip here, where Jake Tapper decides to, I guess, ask him a follow-up question on this, even though it was completely embarrassing, just a couple more details in terms of John Bolton and his actions under the Trump administration. So, as pointed out here by Adam Johnson, he says, while working under Trump, Bolton attempted a coup in Venezuela in broad daylight and was very open about it. The OAS, the Organization of American States, more subtle coup in Bolivia, worked with Bolton to delegitimize a perfectly legitimate election, and this was also fairly out in the open. So we'll get to more details on the specifics of some of this, but yeah, this guy has literally worked to orchestrate coups throughout his entire career, especially under the Trump administration. But the idea that you would just be able to openly say that on national TV and have not even no accountability, but not even a follow-up question until minutes later when Jake Tapper's producer told him to follow up on it, I mean, that's just completely fucking insane. It shows you how absolutely confident that somebody like John Bolton is, a war criminal, somebody who has been pushing for the worst foreign policy decisions in American history, the Iraq War, all of these other various interventions overseas. The idea that this guy is not sitting in a fucking gulag right now instead of being on national TV, on CNN no less, is absolutely fucking insane, and I think says a lot about the impunity that the U.S. empire acts with on a regular basis. But now let's get into the, I guess, follow-up question from Jake Tapper here.
To anathematize the rest of the Republican Party, and that's unacceptable.
I do want to ask a follow-up. When we were talking about what is capable, what you need to do to be able to plan a coup, and you cited your expertise having planned coups.
I'm not going to get into the specifics, but
successful coups?
Well, I wrote about Venezuela in the book, and it turned out not to be successful. Not that we had all that much to do with it, but I saw what it took for an opposition to try and overturn an illegally elected president, and they failed. The notion that Donald Trump was half as competent as the Venezuelan opposition is laughable. But I think there's another...
I feel like there's other stuff you're not telling me, though.
I'm sure there is. I think there's another point here that came out in the testimony that's not been stressed enough. Deposition testimony by, I think his name was Donnell Harvin. I may have taken that down wrong. The chief of intelligence and homeland security for the district
Okay, so he just continues going on with his completely tangential point there. He didn't even answer the fucking question that Jake Tapper was talking about there. He asked him a follow-up question like, hey, generally, what do you mean by you orchestrated coups around the world? And he mentions the fact that he has written and spoken openly about attempting to overthrow the Venezuelan government and appoint, basically, Juan Guaido, this pathetic little guy who has been trying to become the president of Venezuela for years now, entirely unsuccessfully. And they've had multiple embarrassing failures at trying to install him as the president, but he's openly talking about that. And then Jake Tapper says, I'm sure that there's stuff that you're not telling me. And John Bolton says, yeah, of course there's stuff that I'm not telling you. And then Jake Tapper just sits back and lets him continue on the rant. Your entire job as a journalist, as a representative of the so-called free press in the United States, your whole job is to hold people like John Bolton accountable, is to get to the root of exactly what the power centers, the most powerful people and institutions in the country are doing behind the scenes. That's your fucking job. And the extent of his follow-up question on a top national security advisor openly admitting to conducting coups around the world is to just basically say, well, I'm sure there's stuff that you're hiding from me, and then just move on with his day. Like he didn't just say that there's other things that he's hiding from him. Just completely embarrassing as a journalist that, number one, you wouldn't immediately have a follow-up question ready for when he initially said that, and that your producer would have to come in your ear and tell you to follow up on the thing that he was saying minutes earlier. That in and of itself is embarrassing enough, but then to actually ask the follow-up question and then just let him say something like that and just laugh it off as if like there's no consequences to that, there's no need to dig a little bit deeper in terms of what this guy has done over his career in violently attempting or successfully attempting to overthrow democratically elected governments around the world. Just completely fucking insane, top to bottom. But a little bit more details here in terms of what John Bolton has been doing throughout his career under the Trump administration. So here from The Guardian, they say Bolton devotes a considerable space to Venezuelan policy in The Room Where It Happened, his 2020 memoir of his work for Trump. And they say in 2019, the U.S. supported the Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido's call for the military to back his ultimately failed attempt to oust the socialist president Nicolas Maduro, arguing that Maduro's re-election was illegitimate. And they say in his newsletter, The Racket, Jonathan M. Katz, the author of the book Gangsters of Capitalism, great book, I would highly recommend that, but he said, the United States has indeed sponsored and participated in lots of coups and foreign government overthrows dating back to the turn of the 20th century, and Bolton was personally involved in many of the recent efforts in Nicaragua, Iraq, Haiti, and others. And he says generally officials do not admit to this sort of thing on camera. So again, huge missed opportunity there from Jake Tapper. But he finishes saying, keep in mind that throughout the 2019 crisis, Bolton insisted that the Trump administration's support for Juan Guaido was anything but a coup. He literally stood in front of the White House at the height of the affair and told reporters, this is clearly not a coup. Okay, so again, while they're planning this, while they're conducting this coup operation in Venezuela that failed, thankfully, but while they're conducting this operation that failed in the end, he's going out there and openly telling the press, including outlets like CNN, this isn't a coup, don't worry about it, there's no coup happening, going on right here that's led by the United States or influenced largely by the United States. And the media, like CNN, other outlets, proceeded to basically cover that from the perspective of the Trump administration, from the perspective of guys like John Bolton, and then he has the opportunity to question him on this, where he openly admits to participating in a coup attempt in Venezuela, and still no pushback there from the media. Absolutely fucking insane. But a little bit more details about, under the Trump administration, some of his foreign policy actions. So they say in 2018, under the guise of democracy and human rights and entrepreneurship, the NED funneled more than $23 million to opposition groups in Latin American countries, including Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Bolivia. And former National Security Advisor John Bolton called Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua the troika of tyranny in November of 2018. A few months later, in 2019, the U.S. government orchestrated another unsuccessful coup in Venezuela, where Juan Guaido, Washington's chosen puppet to seize power from President Maduro, was funded by the NED. And again, think about this. He's talking about the troika of tyranny here of Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua, some of the same exact governments that the Biden administration recently refused to allow to attend the Summit of the Americas, where he pretended to, again, promote human human rights and democracy in an area in Latin America, Central and South America, where the United States has historically literally participated in dozens of coups and overthrows of democratically elected left-wing governments. So, I mean, this goes back obviously decades and decades within the United States and around the Americas, but this is just the recent shit that he has done. He also had this statement back from 2009, just to give you more of a perspective in terms of who John Bolton actually is. They say Bolton backs Israeli nuke strike on Iran. So he was advocating for a preemptive nuclear strike from Israel to Iran to prevent them from, I guess, developing nuclear weapons. So that was his strategy on that, basically trying to take us to World War III. You also had this one, military force must remain an option with North Korea. Trump's personal diplomacy failed, but Biden can't go back to the Obama approach. So basically, this guy is a complete and utter war hawk against any forms of diplomacy and aggressively pushing for war and overthrowing of democratically elected governments whenever he has the opportunity to do so. So, I mean, again, at the end of the day, this is just the perfect example of how the complete impunity of the U.S. State Department, of the United States empire, and ghouls within it like John Bolton, or any of the people within the establishments of both the Republican and Democratic parties. All of these motherfuckers are criminals. They are openly admitting that they are criminals. They talk about it all the time. And it's just the fact that we happen to live in the most powerful and wealthiest country in the history of the planet, so nobody can really hold them accountable for their actions. So, I mean, again, is there ever going to be any accountability for guys like John Bolton? No, I don't anticipate that there will be. He'll probably just keep getting invited on CNN and MSNBC to deliver his absolutely deranged war hawk takes on a regular basis.